The relentless Arizona sun beat down on the dusty suburban street, turning the asphalt into a wavy mirage. Inside his nondescript white van, Leo adjusted the air conditioning vent to blast directly onto his face. It was his third year as a driver for Quickship Express, and the monotony of the routes had carved a permanent groove of tired acceptance into his spirit. Glendale was his territory, a sprawling maze of identical stucco houses and manicured, water-guzzling lawns. He knew the dogs that barked, the kids who left their bikes in driveways, and the specific porch preferences for drop-offs. It was just another Tuesday, and 1847 Desert Sage Lane was his next stop. The house was like many others, a two-story sand-colored affair with a red-tiled roof and a flourishing oleander bush by the front door. He grabbed the small, flat-rate box from the passenger seat. The label was typed, the return address from some generic office supply store in another state. Nothing out of the ordinary. He hopped out, the dry heat immediately clinging to his uniform shirt. As he approached the door, he heard the faint, melodic strains of a piano. It was a simple, slightly hesitant version of Clair de Lune. He paused for a second, his knuckles an inch from the wood. His mom had been a piano teacher. He recognized the piece, the fumbling over a specific chord transition. The music stopped, then started again from the same measure. He rang the bell. The door opened, and the piano music grew louder, spilling out into the hot afternoon. The woman who stood there was not what he expected, though he wasn't sure what he had expected. She was probably in her late 20s, with kind, tired eyes the color of sea glass and hair the shade of honey that was pulled back into a loose, messy bun. She wore paint-splattered jeans and an old, faded t-shirt for a band he vaguely recognized. A smudge of cobalt blue adorned her cheek. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. "Package for me?" Yeah, for a Chloe Miller," Leo said, suddenly feeling clumsy. He held out the scanner. "Just need a signature." "That's me." She took the stylus, her fingers brushing against his. Her hand was cool. She signed with a quick, elegant flourish. As she did, a little girl, no more than 6 or 7, with 2 missing front teeth and a mass of curly blonde hair, came barreling into the entryway, clutching a sheet of paper. "Mommy, look, I drew a dinosaur riding a bicycle." Chloe's face transformed. The tiredness evaporated, replaced by a radiance that seemed to light up the shaded entryway. "Oh, wow, Sophie. That's incredible. Is that a triceratops?" "No, it's a stegosaurus. See the plates?" the little girl chirped, pointing enthusiastically. Leo stood there, an awkward spectator to this small, intimate moment. He felt like an intruder. "Here you go," he said, handing Chloe the box. "Thanks," she said, her smile still lingering from her daughter's interruption. Her eyes met his for a second longer than necessary, and he noticed the faint, dark circles under them, the kind that spoke of late nights or early mornings, or perhaps both. "No problem. Have a good one." He turned and walked back to the van, the image of the woman and her daughter seared into his mind. The piano music started up again, the same few bars of Clair de Lune, as he drove away. That should have been the end of it. A 30-second interaction, one of hundreds in a week. But it wasn't. For some reason, Leo found himself thinking about Chloe Miller throughout the rest of his shift. There was a quiet sadness about her, a fragility that peeked through the paint splatters and the cheerful mom facade. It was a feeling he recognized, a distant cousin to his own loneliness. The next week, he had another delivery for 1847 Desert Sage Lane. This one was a larger box, from an online art supply store. He felt an inexplicable flutter of anticipation as he pulled up. The piano was silent today. When he rang the bell, Chloe answered almost immediately. She looked more tired, the circles under her eyes more pronounced. "Back again," she said, a wry smile touching her lips. "Seems like it. Art supplies?" he asked, gesturing with the box. "Trying to keep busy," she replied, her voice flat. She signed for the package. "Sophie, the glitter glue is here." The little girl came running, her excitement a stark contrast to her mother's subdued energy. As Sophie grabbed the box and tore into it with glee, Chloe stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. "You play piano?" Leo asked, the question leaving his mouth before he could stop it. She looked surprised. "Oh, a little. Sophie is taking lessons. I'm just relearning. Trying to. Anyway, you heard me butchering Debussy last time." "It wasn't butchery," he said honestly. "You were just stuck on the modulation before the arpeggios. My mom was a teacher. I heard that piece 1,000 times." Her sea glass eyes widened slightly. "You know music." "I know enough to know it's hard." He shrugged, feeling his cheeks grow warm. Well, I should go. Thanks, Leo, she said, reading his name off his uniform. You're welcome, Chloe. The following Tuesday, he didn't have a delivery for her, but his route took him past her street. On a whim, he stopped at a local coffee shop and bought 2 iced coffees. He told himself it was just a nice thing to do. A random act of kindness. He pulled up to her house, his heart hammering in a way that was entirely unprofessional. He walked to the door, the 2 cold cups sweating in his hands. He rang the bell. When she opened the door, her expression was unreadable. Didn't have a package today, he started, feeling like a complete fool. But I was getting coffee and, I don't know. I thought you might like one. Black, with 1 sugar. I guessed. She stared at him, then at the coffees, then back at his face. For a terrifying second, he thought she was going to slam the door. Then, a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. It was the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. You guessed right. Thank you. That's incredibly sweet. She invited him in. Just for a minute, she said. Just to be polite. The house inside was beautiful but felt still. It was impeccably decorated, like a page from a catalog, but it lacked the lived-in chaos he associated with a family home. There were no stray shoes by the door, no piles of mail on the counter. It was as if the soul had been vacuumed out of it. Sophie's artwork was taped to the refrigerator, a vibrant, chaotic rebellion against the sterile perfection. They sat at the kitchen island. Sophie was at a friend's house, Chloe explained. The conversation was awkward at first, 2 strangers sipping coffee in a silent house. But then they started talking about simple things. Music, the oppressive heat, their favorite places in Arizona that weren't scorching deserts. He learned she was a graphic designer who worked from home. She learned he had once been in a band in college, before reality set in and he needed a steady job. And then, without him asking, she said it. Her voice was so quiet he had to lean in to hear. My husband, Mark, he's a commercial pilot. He's gone, a lot. There was a weight to those words, a heaviness that went beyond the simple statement of fact. Leo just nodded, not wanting to pry. It's hard on Sophie, Chloe continued, tracing the condensation on her coffee cup. She asks for him every night. When is Daddy coming home? I never have a good answer. That day, Leo stayed for 15 minutes. It was a breach of protocol, a blurring of lines he'd never crossed before. But as he drove away, the strange hollowness he usually felt at the end of the day was gone, replaced by a buzzing, nervous energy. The coffee stop became a ritual. Every Tuesday, whether he had a delivery or not, he would show up with 2 iced coffees. Sometimes he could only stay for 5 minutes. Other times, if Sophie was there, he'd end up staying for half an hour, helping her with a tricky jigsaw puzzle or listening to her practice her piano, offering a small tip his mother had taught him. He became Mr. Leo, the package man who knew about dinosaurs and brought mommy coffee. He and Chloe talked about everything and nothing. Books, movies, their childhood dreams. They carefully avoided the subject of Mark, an unspoken agreement to keep him a ghost in the periphery of their growing friendship. But his presence was felt in the emptiness of the master bedroom closet, in the singular toothbrush in the holder, in the profound silence that settled over the house when Sophie was in bed. One Tuesday, about 2 months after the first coffee, Leo arrived to find Chloe visibly upset. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. She opened the door and simply said, "He's not coming home for her birthday." Again, he traded his schedule to do a Paris layover. She didn't cry. She just looked defeated, a statue of resignation. Leo's heart ached for her. For Sophie. What does Sophie want for her birthday? He asked gently. She's obsessed with this specific doll. It's sold out everywhere. I've been on a waiting list for weeks. She let out a bitter laugh. I guess a first-class ticket to Paris is more important than a glitter girl princess's doll. Without a word, Leo pulled out his phone. For the next week, on his lunch breaks, between deliveries, late at night, he scoured the internet. He called toy stores in 3 different states. He joined online forums for collectors. It became his mission. He wasn't trying to be a hero, he was trying to erase that look of utter defeat from Chloe's face. 2 days before Sophie's birthday party, he struck gold. A small, independent toy store in Tucson had one left. It was a 2-hour drive. The next day, his day off, he drove to Tucson and back, the glitter girl princess doll sitting proudly in the passenger seat. The look on Chloe's face when he presented it was worth every mile. It wasn't just happiness, it was a profound, soul-deep gratitude. She threw her arms around him in a tight, spontaneous hug. He could feel the delicate bones of her back, smell the faint scent of turpentine and shampoo in her hair. They stood like that in her doorway for a long moment, and something shifted irrevocably between them. A line had been crossed. The birthday party was on a Saturday. Chloe, in a moment of either bravery or madness, had invited him. "Sophie would be thrilled if you came," she'd said, and he knew it was only half the truth. He went, feeling like an imposter among the other moms and a handful of dads. He helped set up chairs, he manned the grill for hot dogs, and he watched as Sophie tore open the wrapping paper on his gift. Her shriek of joy could have shattered glass. She hugged the doll tighter than anything else she'd received. Later, as the party wound down and parents collected their over-sugared children, Leo found himself alone with Chloe in the backyard. Twilight was settling in, painting the sky in shades of lavender and orange. The string lights Chloe had hung were twinkling on, casting a soft, magical glow. "Thank you, Leo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For the doll. For being here. For the coffees. For seeing me." "Chloe, he didn't know what to say. All the unspoken words hung in the air between them. And then she kissed him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't aggressive. It was a slow, tender, heartbreaking kiss that tasted of birthday cake and unspoken longing and years of loneliness. It was a confession and a question all at once. When they pulled apart, her eyes were full of tears. "I'm so lonely, Leo," she whispered. "I know," he said, pulling her into his arms. "So am I." That was the beginning of the end, and the beginning of something else entirely. Their Tuesday coffee meetings became Tuesday afternoons together. He would finish his route early, and they would spend the hours between Sophie's school bus drop-off and dinner time talking, laughing, and, eventually, loving each other. It was a stolen, secret world they built within the sterile walls of that house. He left a toothbrush in her bathroom drawer, hidden behind her things. He kept a change of clothes in the trunk of his car. He knew it was wrong. The guilt was a cold stone in his gut every time he drove away. He was the other man. He was betraying a man he'd never met, contributing to the destruction of a family. But when he was with Chloe, the world made sense. She came alive in his presence. She started painting again, great, vibrant canvases that leaned against the once bare walls. The house started to feel like a home. Sophie was happier, her laughter more frequent, her piano playing more confident with Leo's encouragement. He was delivering so much more than packages. He was delivering joy, and companionship, and a sense of worth to a woman who had been starved of it for years. He was delivering a father figure to a little girl who desperately needed one. The inevitable blow-up came on a random Thursday, a day that wasn't a Tuesday. Leo's van was in the shop, and he was using his personal car, an old, beat-up Jeep Cherokee. He had gotten off work early and, on a reckless impulse, driven to Chloe's. Mark was supposed to be on a 4-day trip to Frankfurt. They were in the kitchen, slow dancing to a song on the radio, when they heard the key in the front door. They froze, leaping apart just as Mark walked in. He was taller than Leo had imagined, with the confident posture of someone used to command. He was dragging his pilot's suitcase, looking tired. His eyes went from Chloe's flushed, guilty face to Leo, standing awkwardly by the kitchen island, holding a coffee mug that clearly belonged in the house. The silence was deafening. "Who are you?" Mark's voice was low and dangerous. "I'm Leo. I'm the delivery driver," he stammered, the lie sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "The delivery driver," Mark repeated, his gaze sweeping over them. "Is that what we're calling it? Does he usually deliver without his uniform? Without his van?" "Mark, it's not what you think," Chloe began, her voice trembling. "Don't," he roared, making both of them flinch. "Don't you dare. How long has this been going on?" The confrontation that followed was ugly. Accusations were hurled like knives. Mark called her ungrateful, listing the house, the car, the lifestyle he provided. Chloe, her initial fear turning into a torrent of long-suppressed rage, screamed back about empty promises, missed birthdays, and the crushing isolation of her life. She called him a ghost, a stranger to his own daughter. Leo stood there, a statue of shame. He was the catalyst, but the explosion was born of years of neglect. He was just the spark that lit the powder keg. "Get out," Mark snarled, turning his fury on Leo. "Get out of my house." Leo looked at Chloe. Her face was streaked with tears, but she gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He left, walking past Mark without another word. The drive home was a blur of self-loathing and terror. The fallout was nuclear. Chloe called him that night, sobbing. Mark had moved into a hotel. He was talking to a lawyer. He had taken all his things. He had told her she was a terrible mother, that she had destroyed their family. The guilt was consuming her. For weeks, they existed in a state of limbo. They couldn't see each other, it was too dangerous. Mark had hired a private investigator. Their communication was reduced to furtive, late-night phone calls, their words full of despair and a love that now felt tainted and doomed. Leo thought about quitting his job, about moving away. The weight of what he had done, the family he had helped break, was crushing him. He had come to deliver a package, and he had ended up delivering the final, devastating blow to a crumbling marriage. But then, something unexpected happened. In the midst of the lawyers and the anger, a focus emerged: Sophie. Through her therapist, it came out that Sophie had been asking her mother for months when Mr. Leo would come back. She had drawn a picture for her therapist, a picture of her mom, herself, and Leo, all holding hands in front of a house, with a bright yellow sun in the sky. In the corner, a small, sad figure of a man in a uniform was flying away in an airplane. The childish drawing was a stark, simple truth. It cut through the complexity of adult betrayal and laid everything bare. Sophie felt safer, happier, and more loved with Leo in her life. It didn't make what they had done right. The infidelity was a stain that would never fully wash out. But it forced a painful, necessary clarity. Mark, confronted with the reality of his absence from his daughter's emotional world, began to see that the destruction of his marriage wasn't the work of a single man with a coffee, but the result of 1,000 small abandonments. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. It was bitter and financially devastating for Chloe, but she got primary custody of Sophie. Mark, to his credit, embarked on a genuine effort to rebuild his relationship with his daughter, scaling back his international roots to be present in her life. Leo and Chloe didn't jump into a relationship. They gave it time. They went to counseling, both separately and, eventually, together. They had to deconstruct their beginning, to understand the loneliness and the circumstances that brought them together in such a destructive way. They had to learn to build something new, something honest, on the ashes of the old. A year after the divorce was final, Leo no longer worked for Quickship Express. He'd used his experience to start a small logistics company of his own. He was packing a box in his new office, their garage, when Chloe came in, holding a letter. "It's from the gallery," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "They want to give me a solo show. All the paintings I've been working on." He pulled her into a hug, spinning her around. The paintings were her story, the loneliness, the passion, the guilt, the hope. They were raw and beautiful and true. That night, they sat on the porch of their small, rented house, a house filled with noise and mess and love. Sophie was inside, practicing a new, more complex piece on the piano they had bought together. She was playing it perfectly. Leo looked at Chloe, at the woman he had fallen in love with under the worst possible circumstances. He had come to her door to deliver a small, flat-rate box. But he had ended up delivering a doll for a heartbroken little girl, a sense of purpose to a lost artist, and in the end, through a tangled web of mistakes and pain, he had delivered them both to a new, imperfect but real kind of happiness. He had delivered a family.